You want to see your blood pressure numbers go down, and you want to see that happen now, not 3 months from now. There is a specific physiology to how your blood vessels tighten and relax, and when you understand how to flip the right switches in your body, you can see a difference in your readings almost immediately. Most people ignore the simple mechanics of blood pressure because they are too focused on the long-term medication strategy, but the daily fluctuations are what often cause the most worry and the most damage. I'm Dr. Ben Harris, and today I am going to walk you through the doctor-approved methods to lower your blood pressure instantly by correcting the mistakes you are likely making right now. Let's begin with the first and most critical step, the one that almost every patient I see gets wrong at home. 1. The silent gap protocol. If you want an instantly lower reading, you have to stop accidentally driving your blood pressure up while you are trying to measure it. This sounds incredibly simple, but the data tells us that nearly 80% of home blood pressure readings are artificially high because of environmental errors. When we talk about lowering blood pressure instantly, usually what we are doing is stripping away the artificial stress that is spiking the number, revealing your true lower baseline. This matters because if you treat a false high number with more medication or panic, you can end up with dangerously low pressure later. Let me tell you about Arthur. Arthur was 72 years old, a retired engineer who loved precision and numbers. He came to see me because he was absolutely convinced that his blood pressure medication had stopped working. He brought in a notebook filled with weeks of readings, and every single morning his top number, the systolic pressure, was sitting around 160. He was terrified, and he was ready to ask for a double dose of his prescription. When I looked at his numbers, I noticed something interesting about the timing. His readings were always taken at 8:00 a.m. sharp. I asked Arthur to walk me through his morning routine, specifically the 5 minutes before he put that cuff on his arm. He told me that he would get up, have his coffee, sit at the kitchen table, and put on the cuff. While the machine was running, he would chat with his wife about the news on the television or their plans for the garden that day. He thought he was being relaxed. He thought that because he was sitting down and chatting happily, he was at rest. But physiologically, Arthur was making a critical mistake. When you speak, even if you are speaking calmly, your blood pressure rises. This is a phenomenon known as the pressor effect of speech. Engaging in conversation requires cognitive effort and changes your breathing pattern, which signals your heart to pump slightly harder and your vessels to constrict slightly to support the activity. Arthur was adding 10 to 15 points to his reading simply by talking to his wife while the machine was squeezing his arm. We made a change. I told Arthur to implement the silent gap protocol. The next morning, he sat in a chair with back support, feet flat on the floor, and he did not say a word for 5 full minutes before pressing the button. He kept the room quiet. He did not look at his phone. He did not watch the news. He simply sat in the silence, letting his body settle. When he pressed the button, he remained silent during the inflation and deflation. His reading that morning was 135/85. It had dropped 25 points instantly, simply by removing the artificial spike caused by conversation and lack of rest. Arthur did not need more medication. He needed accurate measurement habits. This is the first thing you must do. You need to create a silent gap of 5 minutes before you measure. Sit in a comfortable chair that supports your back. If you sit on a stool or a soft couch where you have to use your core muscles to sit upright, your diastolic pressure, the bottom number, will be higher. Your feet must be flat on the floor, not crossed. Crossing your legs at the knees or ankles can raise your systolic pressure by up to 8 points. Your arm should be supported on a table so that the cuff is at the same level as your heart. If your arm is hanging down at your side, gravity will increase the pressure in the cuff, giving you a reading that is too high. And crucially, you must be silent. Do not talk to your spouse. Do not talk on the phone. Do not answer a question. Just be in the quiet. This ensures that the number you see is your true blood pressure, not a reflection of your activity. It is the fastest way to see a lower number because it eliminates the error that is pushing it up. Before we move on to the active techniques, I want to know where you are starting from today. In the comments below, please type your age and what your usual top number, the systolic number, tends to be in the morning. It helps me understand who is watching so I can tailor future advice to your specific needs. Now that we have established an accurate baseline, let's move on to a technique that actively lowers the pressure inside your vessels. 2. The 478 vascular reset. Once you are sitting correctly and getting an accurate reading, you might still find that your numbers are higher than you want them to be due to stress or anxiety. This is especially common if you have white coat syndrome, which can happen even in your own living room if you get nervous when you see the blood pressure machine. The anxiety about high blood pressure causes high blood pressure. It is a vicious cycle. Your body releases adrenaline, your heart beats faster, and your blood vessels tighten up to prepare for a fight or flight situation, even though the only threat is the Velcro cuff on your arm. To lower your blood pressure instantly in this situation, you need a manual override for your nervous system. You need to tell your body that it is safe to relax the vessel walls. The most effective way to do this is through a breathing pattern known as the 478 technique. Let me tell you about Martha. Martha was 68 years old and she was a worrier. She loved her family dearly, but she carried the weight of everyone's problems on her shoulders. Every time she sat down to take her blood pressure, she could feel her heart start to race. She would watch the numbers ticking up on the screen and panic, thinking about strokes and heart attacks. By the time the machine finished, her reading would be 170/95. She would wait 2 minutes and try again, but she would be even more anxious the second time, so the number would stay high or go higher. Martha came to me feeling defeated. She felt like her body was betraying her. I taught her the 478 vascular reset and asked her to do it right there in the exam room. We sat together and I guided her through the breath. Here is what happened. Within 2 minutes of breathing in this specific pattern, her visible tension melted away. Her shoulders dropped. Her hands stopped shaking. We took her blood pressure again, and it was 140/85. It was still a little elevated, but it had dropped 30 points in systolic pressure just by turning off the adrenaline response. The 478 technique works because it stimulates the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the main controller of your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest mode of your body. When you extend your exhale so that it is longer than your inhale, you send a powerful signal to the vagus nerve to slow your heart rate and dilate your blood vessels. Dilating the blood vessels means opening them up wider. Imagine a garden hose that is pinched. The pressure builds up behind the pinch. If you unkink the hose, the pressure drops instantly and the water flows smoothly. This breathing technique unkinks your blood vessels. Here is how you do it, and you can try this with me right now while you are reading. You can do this sitting up or lying down, but if you are about to take your blood pressure, you should be sitting in your measurement chair. First, exhale completely through your mouth, making a whoosh sound. Close your mouth and inhale quietly through your nose to a mental count of 4. Hold your breath for a count of 7. Then, exhale completely through your mouth, making a whoosh sound to a count of 8. That is 1 breath. You repeat the cycle 3 more times for a total of 4 breaths. The ratio is what is important. If you cannot hold your breath for the full count, that is okay. Just keep the ratio of 4 to 7 to 8. The inhale counts to 4. The hold counts to 7. The exhale counts to 8. The long exhale is the key. It forces you to empty your lungs completely and slows down your heart rate. Martha started doing this every morning before she put on the cuff. She would sit in her chair, do 4 cycles of the 4-7-8 breath, and then press the start button. She found that not only were her numbers lower, but she felt more in control of her health. She stopped fearing the machine because she knew she had a tool to calm her body down. It is a simple tool, completely free, and you can use it anywhere. If you are stuck in traffic and feel your frustration rising, do the breathing. If you are in a waiting room at the doctor's office, do the breathing. It is an instant lever you can pull to lower the pressure in your system. One small safety note here. If you feel lightheaded when you do this breathing, just resume your normal breathing pattern. It takes a little practice to get used to the deep exhales, but most older adults find it very soothing once they get the rhythm. This supports steadier readings and protects your arteries from those sharp spikes of cortisol and adrenaline. Now that we have corrected the measurement error and calmed the nervous system, we need to look at the chemical balance inside your blood. 3. The potassium buffer adjustment. This is a strategy that works relatively quickly, often showing results within 24 to 48 hours, which is very fast in the world of nutrition. We often hear that, to lower blood pressure, we must cut salt. And that is true. Sodium causes your body to hold on to water. If you have too much water in your blood, the volume increases. Think of a water balloon. If you put more water in it, the pressure against the rubber walls increases. Your arteries are the same. Excess sodium leads to excess fluid volume, which leads to high blood pressure. However, cutting salt is only half of the equation, and for many seniors it is the harder half because food starts to taste bland and you lose your appetite. The missing half of the equation is potassium. Potassium is the natural antidote to sodium. It helps your kidneys flush out the excess sodium through your urine, and it also helps relax the walls of your blood vessels. Increasing your potassium intake can be just as effective as decreasing your sodium intake. Let me introduce you to James. James was 75 years old, and he lived alone. He was not a cook. He relied heavily on canned soups, frozen dinners, and deli meats for his lunches and dinners. These are all sodium bombs. When his doctor told him his blood pressure was dangerously high, James tried to just stop eating salt. He bought low-sodium bread, he stopped using the salt shaker, and he tried to eat plain steamed vegetables. He was miserable. He felt weak and tired, and frankly, he was not enjoying his life. He came to me saying he felt lethargic, and his blood pressure had not come down as much as he hoped. The problem was that James had created an imbalance. He was so focused on restriction that he was not giving his body the nutrients it needed to regulate pressure. We made a shift in his strategy. Instead of just taking things away, we decided to add something powerful. We introduced the potassium buffer. I asked James to add one high-potassium food to every single meal. He did not have to become a gourmet chef, he just needed to make smarter swaps. For breakfast, instead of toast with butter, he had a bowl of oatmeal with a sliced banana. Bananas are famous for potassium, but they are actually not the highest source. For lunch, alongside his sandwich, he started having a side of white beans. He would buy the low-sodium canned white beans, rinse them thoroughly to wash away the salty brine, and toss them with a little olive oil and lemon juice. White beans are incredibly high in potassium. For dinner, he started baking a sweet potato instead of having instant mashed potatoes. Sweet potatoes are a powerhouse for blood pressure. He also started adding a handful of fresh spinach to his plate. Within 2 days of making these additions, James noticed he was urinating more frequently. This was a good sign. It meant his kidneys were working efficiently to flush out the excess sodium and fluid volume from his blood. When he measured his blood pressure at the end of the week, his systolic number had dropped by 8 points. He felt more energetic because he was eating nutrient-dense food, and he didn't feel deprived. He was simply buffering the sodium he did eat with enough potassium to help his body handle it. Now, I want to be very clear about the foods here, because I know many of you are careful about what you eat. We are talking about whole, natural foods: spinach, avocados, white beans, sweet potatoes, bananas, and oranges. There is no need for gelatin or processed additives here. We are looking for clean, plant-based sources of minerals. However, there is a very important safety warning for this step. If you have kidney disease, or if you are on certain medications that spare potassium, such as spironolactone or certain ACE inhibitors, you must talk to your doctor before significantly increasing your potassium intake. If your kidneys cannot filter potassium well, it can build up in your blood and cause heart rhythm problems. But for the vast majority of older adults with normal kidney function, getting more potassium from food is one of the safest and most effective ways to lower blood pressure naturally. It turns your diet into a tool that actively fights hypertension. Think of it as a buffer. Every time you eat, you want to make sure you are providing the nutrients that help your vessels relax. So, look at your plate today. Is there a source of potassium on it? If not, that is an easy, instant change you can make for your next meal. This brings us to the next level of intervention. We have fixed the measurement, we have calmed the nerves, and we have adjusted the blood chemistry. Now we need to talk about the physical structure of your arteries and how we can use movement to unlock them. This is where the connection between blood sugar and blood pressure becomes undeniable. Many people treat them as separate problems. You take a pill for your pressure and a pill for your sugar, but in the body, they are intimately connected. High blood sugar makes your blood sticky and viscous. Imagine trying to pump syrup through a hose versus pumping water. The pump has to work much harder to move the syrup. That is what high glucose does to your heart. It also inflames the lining of your arteries, making them stiff. Stiff arteries cannot expand when blood pumps through them, which drives your pressure up even higher. So, the next technique is designed to tackle both problems at once. 4. The vascular unloading walk. This is not just go for a walk. This is a specific timing and intensity of movement designed to unload the glucose from your blood and dilate the arteries in your legs to draw pressure away from your heart. Most people exercise in the morning or the evening, which is fine for general fitness. But for blood pressure control, the timing of your movement is a prescription. We want to time this movement for when your system is under the most load. Usually, that is about 30 to 45 minutes after you finish a meal. At this time, your blood sugar is rising, and your digestive system is demanding a lot of blood flow. Let me tell you about Eleanor. Eleanor was 70 years old, and she struggled with what we call postprandial hypotension, followed by hypertension. That is a fancy way of saying her blood pressure would swing wildly after she ate. She would feel very tired and groggy after lunch, almost passing out, which is the hypotension part. Then, an hour later, her blood pressure would rebound and spike very high, causing her headaches and anxiety. She was also pre-diabetic, so her blood sugar was contributing to that sticky, thick blood I mentioned earlier. Eleanor's routine was to eat a heavy lunch and then sit in her recliner to watch her favorite soap operas. She thought she was resting, but her body was struggling to process the meal. The glucose was sitting in her blood, irritating her vessels, and her lack of movement meant her blood was pooling. I prescribed the vascular unloading walk. The rule was simple. She had to wait 30 minutes after her last bite of food. Then, she had to walk for just 10 minutes. It did not have to be fast. It did not have to be a power walk. It just had to be continuous movement. Here is why this works instantly. When you use the large muscles in your legs, your quadriceps and your calves, they act like a sponge for glucose. They suck the sugar right out of your bloodstream to use for energy without even needing insulin. This instantly thins the blood by removing the excess sugar. Simultaneously, the arteries in your legs dilate or open up wide to deliver oxygen to the working muscles. When the massive arteries in your legs open up, it creates a huge reservoir for blood to flow into. This draws pressure away from your chest and your head. It is like opening a relief valve on a pressurized tank. The pressure in the whole system drops because the volume is being distributed more evenly into the legs. Eleanor was skeptical because she felt tired after eating, but she promised to try it. The first day, she put on her sneakers before lunch so she wouldn't have an excuse. 30 minutes after eating, she went out to her driveway. She walked up and down the flat pavement for 10 minutes. She came back inside and told me she felt surprisingly awake. The grogginess was gone. But the real proof was in the numbers. When she checked her blood pressure an hour later, it was steady. The massive spike she usually saw in the afternoon simply didn't happen. Her evening numbers were better too. By using the walk to manage the glucose spike, she prevented the domino effect that usually ruined her blood pressure for the rest of the day. If you are just getting started with this, don't overthink it. You don't need a gym membership. You don't need a treadmill. You just need to move your legs. If the weather is bad, you can march in place in your living room while you watch TV. You can walk laps around your kitchen island. The location doesn't matter. The muscle activation matters. This supports steadier readings throughout the day and helps you manage your weight over time, which is another huge factor in blood pressure control. However, there is a safety check here. If you experience chest pain, severe shortness of breath, or dizziness while walking, you must stop immediately and sit down. If the symptoms do not go away, seek medical attention. But for most people, This gentle, timed movement is safer than sitting still because it helps the heart move the blood. Remember, the goal is not to become a marathon runner. The goal is to use your muscles as a tool to unload pressure from your vascular system. It is mechanical assistance for your heart. And just like the breathing technique, it is something you can do today. You can do it after your very next meal. But what if you cannot walk well? What if you have bad knees or hip pain or the weather is dangerous? Does that mean you are out of luck? Absolutely not. There is another way to trigger this same relaxation effect in your blood vessels without ever standing up. It is a technique that was originally developed for fighter pilots to manage blood pressure G-forces, but researchers found it works incredibly well for older adults with hypertension. It involves a very specific type of resistance training that you can do while sitting in your favorite chair. This is often the missing link for seniors who have mobility issues but desperately need to lower their pressure. I call it the isometric grip technique, and it is going to be our fifth strategy. But before I explain exactly how to do it and the specific tool you need, which you probably already have in your house, I want to make sure you have digested the first 4 steps. We have the silent gap for measurement. We have the 4-7-8 breath for the nervous system. We have the potassium buffer for blood chemistry, and we have the vascular unloading walk for circulation. If you are already doing one of these, or if you are planning to start one today, keep that commitment in mind. Consistency is the secret ingredient that makes these instant fixes turn into permanent solutions. In the second part of this guide, I am going to show you the isometric grip, and then we are going to tackle 2 more hidden factors: the fluid balance mistake that happens in the evening, and the sleep environment trigger that ruins your morning numbers before you even wake up. These final steps are often the ones that get people off the plateau when they feel like they have tried everything else. Don't go anywhere, because we are going to continue right now with the technique that can lower your pressure while you sit. The isometric grip technique. This is the solution for anyone who felt left out when I talked about walking. If you have arthritis in your knees, if you are recovering from a surgery, or if you simply have days where your energy is too low for a walk, this is your lever. It is based on the science of isometric resistance. Isometric means the muscle tenses without moving the joint. Think of pushing against a wall. Your muscles are working hard, but the wall is not moving and neither are you. Research has shown that this specific type of muscle contraction is incredibly effective at lowering resting blood pressure. In fact, some studies suggest it can be as effective as a single medication when done consistently. Let me introduce you to George. George was 80 years old. He had been a very active man in his youth, a carpenter who was always on his feet. But in his later years, osteoarthritis had taken a toll on his knees and hips. Walking for exercise was painful for him. Every step was a reminder of what he had lost. Because he couldn't move much, his blood pressure was creeping up. His doctor wanted him to do cardio, but George physically couldn't do what was asked of him. He felt stuck, and his numbers reflected that frustration. He was consistently sitting in the 150s over 90s. He came to me looking for an alternative. He said, "Dr. Harris, I can't run and I can't walk fast. Does that mean I'm just going to have high blood pressure forever?" I told him absolutely not. I introduced him to the hand grip protocol. It sounds almost too simple to be true, but the physiology is fascinating. When you squeeze your hand tightly and hold it, you temporarily squeeze the blood vessels in your forearm. This reduces blood flow to that area for a moment. When you release the squeeze, fresh blood rushes back in. This rush of blood creates a shear force against the vessel walls, which stimulates the lining of your arteries, the endothelium, to release a molecule called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is the body's most powerful natural vasodilator. It tells your blood vessels to relax and widen. By doing this repeatedly, you are essentially training your body to keep your vessels open and relaxed all over, not just in your hands. We got George a simple stress ball. You can use a rolled-up hand towel, a tennis ball, or a specialized grip strengthener, but a firm stress ball is usually the most comfortable for seniors. Here is the protocol George followed. He would sit in his favorite armchair while watching the evening news. He would squeeze the ball in his right hand. He wasn't trying to crush it. He was squeezing at about 30% of his maximum strength. He held that squeeze for 2 minutes. Then he rested for 2 minutes. Then he switched to the left hand, squeezed for 2 minutes, and rested for 2 minutes. He did this twice for each hand. The whole routine took about 16 minutes. He did this 3 times a week. That is it. 16 minutes, 3 times a week, while sitting in a chair. After 4 weeks, George came back for a checkup. He was beaming. His systolic blood pressure had dropped by 12 points. He hadn't run a mile. He hadn't hurt his knees. He had simply harnessed the power of isometric resistance to flood his system with nitric oxide. It gave him a sense of agency again. He realized he wasn't broken, he just needed a different tool. If you want to try this, there is one very critical safety rule. You must breathe while you squeeze. It is natural to want to hold your breath when you exert effort. We call this the Valsalva maneuver, and it can actually spike your blood pressure dangerously high during the squeeze. So as you squeeze the ball, keep talking or keep counting out loud. If you are counting, you are breathing. Don't clench your jaw and don't hold your breath. Just a steady, firm squeeze while you breathe normally. This is easy on the joints and safer for those with balance issues. I am curious if any of you have used this method before. In the comments, let me know. Have you ever tried hand grip exercises for strength or blood pressure? It is a small movement with a massive impact. Now let's move to the next hidden factor. We have addressed the structure of the vessels and the nervous system, but we need to talk about what is flowing inside those vessels. We need to talk about volume and hydration. 6. The fluid balance strategy. This is a delicate balance, especially for older adults. As we age, our sense of thirst diminishes. You can be significantly dehydrated and not even feel thirsty. When you are dehydrated, your blood volume drops, which sounds like it would lower blood pressure, but the body reacts in a panic. To preserve blood flow to your vital organs, your body releases a hormone called vasopressin. Vasopressin does exactly what its name suggests. It presses the vessels. It constricts your arteries to keep pressure up in a low-volume system. So, chronic low-level dehydration leads to constricted vessels and thicker, more viscous blood. Thick blood is harder to pump, raising your pressure. On the flip side, many seniors are terrified of drinking water because they don't want to be running to the bathroom all night, disrupting their sleep. Let me tell you about Linda. Linda was 65 and she valued her sleep above everything else. She had a strict rule: no liquids after 4 p.m. She thought she was being smart. She would have her dinner without a drink, and she would watch TV in the evening without a cup of tea. She slept through the night without needing the bathroom, which she loved. But every morning, she woke up with a headache. And every morning, her blood pressure was surprisingly high, hovering around 150/90. She couldn't understand it. She was rested, but her numbers were bad. The problem was that Linda was putting her body into a state of drought for 12 to 14 hours every single day. By morning, her blood was thick, her vessels were clamped down tight with vasopressin, and her heart was struggling to push the sludge through her system. She had traded one problem for another. She avoided the bathroom trips, but she created a hypertensive environment in her own veins. We had to find the middle ground. We implemented the fluid balance strategy, which is essentially about front-loading your hydration. I told Linda she needed to drink the majority of her water before 3 p.m. She started her day with a large glass of water immediately upon waking. This is crucial because you lose water while you breathe at night. Then, she would drink steadily throughout the morning and early afternoon. But here was the change for the evening. Instead of cutting off fluids completely at 4 p.m., which was too extreme, we switched to sip mode after 6 p.m. She was allowed to have water, but she would just take small sips to keep her mouth moist and stay hydrated without overloading her bladder. We also looked at what she was drinking. She had been drinking a lot of coffee in the morning, which acts as a diuretic and flushes water out. We swapped her second cup of coffee for herbal tea. The result was remarkable. Within a week, the morning headaches vanished. That was the first sign that her blood viscosity was normalizing. Her morning blood pressure readings started to drift down. She was no longer forcing her body to fight against dehydration. She found that she still slept well. Because she wasn't chugging a pint of water right before bed, she didn't have urgent bathroom trips. But because she wasn't completely parched, her body didn't release that vasopressin spike in the early morning hours. It is a simple adjustment. Look at your urine color. It should be a pale straw color. If it is dark yellow, you are dehydrated and your heart is working harder than it needs to. If it is completely clear, you might be overhydrating and flushing out electrolytes. Aim for that pale straw color, and if you are worried about the bathroom, front load your water, drink 2 glasses before breakfast, drink 2 glasses before lunch, then taper off. This supports steadier readings and protects your kidneys, which are the master regulators of blood pressure in the long term. One quick subscribe reminder here. If you are finding these practical tips helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss our future guides on senior health. Now we have arrived at the final item on our list. This is the one that sets the stage for everything else. If you get this wrong, you can do all the breathing and walking you want, but you will still be fighting an uphill battle. It is about how you end your day. 7. The evening blue block. We often think of blood pressure as a daytime concern, something we manage while we are awake. But the most important time for your blood pressure is actually when you are asleep. In a healthy person, blood pressure should drop by about 10 to 20% during the night. We call this dipping. It is the cardiovascular system's vacation. It gives your heart a break and allows your arteries to repair themselves. However, many older adults are non-dippers. Their blood pressure stays high all night long. This is incredibly dangerous and is strongly linked to higher risks of stroke and heart failure. One of the biggest drivers of this non-dipping phenomenon is our modern environment, specifically light. Let me tell you about Thomas. Thomas was 74 and he lived alone. He didn't like the silence of the empty house at night. So his routine for 20 years had been to fall asleep with the television on. He would lie in bed watching the news or old movies and eventually drift off. The TV would stay on, flickering blue light into the room, and the sound would fluctuate with commercials. Thomas told me he slept fine, but his blood pressure was stubborn. No matter what medication we tried, his morning numbers were always the highest of the day. I explained to Thomas that his eyes were closed, but his brain was still seeing the light. Blue light, which comes from TVs, phones, and tablets, suppresses the production of melatonin. Melatonin is not just a sleep hormone, it is a signal to your body to lower its temperature and relax the blood vessels. When you suppress melatonin with blue light, you keep your cortisol levels high. Cortisol is the stress hormone. So, Thomas was lying in bed, but chemically, his body was in daytime mode. His cortisol was keeping his blood sugar high and his blood pressure elevated all night long. He was never getting that crucial dip. We had to make a change, and it was a hard one for him because the TV was his comfort. We reached a compromise. I asked him to try the evening blue block for just 1 week. The rule was, no screens 1 hour before bed. He could listen to the radio. He could listen to an audiobook or a podcast, but he could not have the flickering light of the TV in the bedroom. He also lowered the temperature in his room by 3 degrees. Cooler temperatures help signal the body to drop into deep sleep and lower blood pressure. The first 2 nights were difficult for him. He felt the silence was too loud. But on the 3rd night, he slept deeper than he had in years. He didn't wake up groggy. And when he took his blood pressure that morning, using the silent gap protocol we talked about in step 1, he saw a number he hadn't seen in a decade. 128/78. His body had finally been allowed to rest. He had finally become a dipper. The constant bombardment of light had been keeping his system on high alert. Once he removed the trigger, his natural rhythm returned. You don't have to live in a cave, but you need to respect your biology. 8. The nitric oxide feast. We touched on this briefly with the hand grip exercise, but now we need to talk about how to achieve this chemically through your food. There is a molecule in your body called nitric oxide. I want you to remember that name. It is the master switch for vasodilation. When your body produces enough nitric oxide, your arteries relax and open up, almost like a flower opening to the sun. When they open, blood pressure drops effortlessly because there is more room for the blood to flow. As we age, unfortunately, our bodies become less efficient at producing this molecule naturally. By the time you are 60, you might be producing only half the nitric oxide you did when you were 20. This is a major reason why blood pressure tends to creep up with age, even if your lifestyle hasn't changed. However, you can bypass this aging mechanism by providing your body with the raw materials to make it. These raw materials are called dietary nitrates. Let me tell you about Margaret. Margaret was 77 years old, and she was frustrated. She told me, "Dr. Harris, I eat salads every day. I eat healthy. Why is my pressure still 150? I asked Margaret to describe her salad. She said, "Well, I use a big bowl of iceberg lettuce, some cucumbers, a little tomato, and low-fat ranch dressing." Margaret was eating a salad, yes, but functionally she was eating crunchy water. Iceberg lettuce provides hydration and some fiber, which is good, but it contains almost no dietary nitrates. She was eating healthy by 1980s standards, but she wasn't eating medicinally for her blood vessels. We made a swap. I didn't ask her to change her entire diet. I just asked her to change her leaves. We swapped the iceberg lettuce for arugula and spinach, and I asked her to add one specific ingredient to her lunch 3 times a week: roasted beets. Beets and dark leafy greens like arugula are the most potent sources of nitrates in the supermarket. When you chew them, and the chewing is important, the bacteria in your mouth convert these nitrates into nitrites. Then, when you swallow them, your stomach acid converts those nitrites into nitric oxide. It is a chemical assembly line that starts in your mouth and ends with relaxed arteries. Margaret was skeptical because she remembered hating beets as a child, but she agreed to try roasting them with a little olive oil, which brings out the sweetness, rather than boiling them. She started having a nitric oxide salad for lunch: arugula, roasted beets, and a few walnuts. The results were not instantaneous like the breathing technique, but they were consistent. Over the course of 3 weeks, her baseline pressure began to drift down. She went from the 150s to the 130s. She reported feeling more mental clarity as well, which makes sense because if you are opening up blood vessels, you are improving blood flow to the brain just as much as to the rest of the body. If you want to try this, there are a few rules to make it work. First, do not use antiseptic mouthwash. This is a critical error many seniors make. Strong alcohol-based mouthwash kills the bacteria in your mouth. You might think that is good for hygiene, but remember, you need those specific bacteria on your tongue to start the conversion of the nitrates. If you kill the bacteria, you break the assembly line. You can eat all the beets in the world, but if you use strong mouthwash immediately after, you won't get the blood pressure benefit. Second, if you have a history of kidney stones, specifically oxalate stones, you need to be careful with spinach and beet greens. In that case, stick to arugula or romaine lettuce, which are lower in oxalates but still good for you. Also, a small warning: beets can turn your urine and stool a reddish color. Do not panic. It is not blood, it is just the pigment from the vegetable. It is harmless, but it has sent many terrified people to the emergency room unnecessarily. This supports steadier readings by chemically instructing your arteries to stay open. It is food as pharmacy. 9. The thermal peripheral shift. This next strategy uses physics to manipulate where your blood is stored in your body. If you have high blood pressure, you might notice that you often have cold hands or cold feet. This is not a coincidence. When your blood vessels are constricted or clamped down, your body keeps the blood centered in your core to protect your vital organs. This means less warm blood reaches your fingers and toes, but this also means all that blood volume is crowded into the center of your body, raising the pressure in your chest and head. We can use heat to reverse this. We want to draw the blood away from the center and out to the periphery, to the arms and legs. We call this shunting. Let me introduce you to Robert. Robert was 82, and he had stubbornly high pressure in the evenings. He also suffered from mild insomnia because he just couldn't get comfortable. He told me his feet were blocks of ice when he got into bed. This was the clue. His peripheral vessels were clamped shut. I prescribed a 20-minute warm foot soak before bed. This wasn't just for hygiene, it was a hemodynamic intervention. Hemodynamics is the study of how blood flows. Robert bought a simple plastic basin. Every night at 8 p.m., while he listened to his radio, he would soak his feet in warm water. Not scalding hot, we have to be careful with burns, but pleasantly warm. Here is what happened physiologically. The heat caused the blood vessels in his feet and lower legs to dilate massively. Blood rushed from his high-pressure core down to his legs to cool them off. This effectively increased the container size of his circulatory system. Imagine you have a certain amount of air in a small balloon. The pressure is high. If you can suddenly make the balloon bigger, the pressure drops. By dilating the vessels in his legs, Robert made his vascular container bigger. His blood pressure dropped by an average of 10 points during those evenings, and as a bonus, because his feet were warm, he fell asleep much faster. If you want to try the thermal peripheral shift, you can do it with a foot bath, or simply a warm shower before bed. The key is to warm the extremities. However, safety is paramount here. If you have diabetes or neuropathy, numbness in your feet, you must be extremely careful. You might not feel if the water is too hot, and you could burn yourself. Always test the water with your elbow or a thermometer first. It should be warm, not hot. Also, be careful when you stand up. Because we have moved blood to your feet, you might feel a little lightheaded if you stand up too quickly. Take your time. Dry your feet thoroughly to prevent slipping. This is a gentle, pleasant way to use temperature to lower your numbers. 10. The magnesium anchor. We talked about potassium earlier, but there is another mineral that is arguably just as important for the senior heart. Magnesium. I call it the relaxation mineral. While calcium causes muscles to contract, magnesium causes them to relax. Your heart is a muscle. Your arteries are wrapped in tiny muscles. If you are deficient in magnesium, your arteries literally cannot relax. They stay in a state of microspasm, keeping your pressure high. Studies show that a huge percentage of older adults are deficient in magnesium because our soil is depleted and we don't eat enough seeds and nuts. Let me tell you about Patricia. Patricia was 69. She had high blood pressure, but she also complained of frequent leg cramps at night and heart palpitations, that fluttering feeling in the chest. These are classic signs of magnesium deficiency. She was taking a diuretic for her blood pressure, which was unfortunately flushing magnesium out of her body along with the water. It was a double-edged sword. We needed to anchor her mineral levels. I asked Patricia to add a specific snack to her day: pumpkin seeds, pepitas. These little green seeds are one of the most concentrated sources of magnesium on the planet. Patricia wasn't a bird, and she didn't want to just eat seeds, so we integrated them. She started sprinkling 2 tablespoons of raw, unsalted pumpkin seeds onto her morning yogurt or oatmeal. She also started keeping a small bag of almonds in her purse for when she was out. Within 2 weeks, the leg cramps disappeared. That was the first sign that her muscles were getting what they needed. The palpitations stopped, and at her next checkup, her blood pressure was down by 8 points. She felt calmer, less jumpy. Magnesium also helps regulate blood sugar, so it was helping her on both fronts. Now, you might ask, Dr. Ben, can I just take a pill? You can, but you have to be careful. Many cheap magnesium supplements are made of magnesium oxide, which is very poorly absorbed and will mostly just give you diarrhea. Food is always safer and better absorbed. Pumpkin seeds, almonds, spinach, black beans, and even dark chocolate, in moderation, are great sources. If you do choose a supplement, look for magnesium glycinate, which is gentle on the stomach. But try the pumpkin seeds first. They are a whole food, providing fiber and healthy fats along with the mineral. One safety note: if you have advanced kidney disease, you must talk to your doctor before adding magnesium, as your kidneys might struggle to clear the excess. For most people, though, this is the missing link that lets the vessel walls finally let go of their tension. 11. The vertical digestion window. This strategy addresses a mechanical trigger for high blood pressure that almost no one talks about. It is the connection between your stomach and your heart. They sit right next to each other, separated only by the diaphragm. If you have bloating, acid reflux, or a hiatal hernia, the pressure in your stomach can irritate the vagus nerve. We have talked about the vagus nerve before. It controls your heart rate. When the stomach is distended or irritated, it can send panic signals up the vagus nerve, causing Romheld syndrome or gastrocardiac symptoms. This leads to heart palpitations and spikes in blood pressure after eating. Let me tell you about David. David was 71. He loved his recliner. After a big dinner, he would immediately go to his living room, kick back the recliner so he was almost lying flat, and watch sports. He would often drift off to sleep right there. He noticed that his blood pressure was always highest about an hour after dinner, and he often felt a tightness in his chest that frightened him. He had been checked for heart attacks, and his heart was fine structurally. The problem was mechanical. By lying down flat with a full stomach, he was allowing acid to creep up his esophagus, and the weight of his full stomach was pressing up against his diaphragm and heart. This pressure was triggering a sympathetic nervous system response, a stress response. I gave David a simple rule, the vertical digestion window. The rule is this: for at least 60 minutes after you finish a meal, your torso must remain vertical. You can sit upright, you can stand, you can walk, which links back to our vascular unloading walk. But you cannot recline, and you certainly cannot lie flat. David grumbled a bit because he loved his post-dinner nap, but he tried it. He stayed sitting upright at the table to read the paper, or he went for a gentle stroll, or he sat in a straight-back chair to watch TV. The chest tightness vanished. The post-dinner blood pressure spike flattened out. By simply using gravity to keep his stomach contents where they belonged, he stopped irritating the nerve that regulates his heart. This also profoundly helped his blood sugar. When you lie down, your digestion slows to a crawl. By staying upright and moving a little, you keep the metabolic fires burning, processing the glucose more efficiently. If you struggle with heartburn or indigestion that seems to make your heart race, this rule is mandatory for you. Gravity is free. Use it. 12. The sour tea ritual. We often look for something to drink during the day, and most of us choose coffee or sweet tea. Caffeine can raise blood pressure in the short term. Sugar raises insulin, which raises blood pressure in the long term. We need a beverage that works for us. There is one flower that has been studied extensively and shown to act very similarly to a class of blood pressure drugs called ACE inhibitors. That flower is hibiscus. Hibiscus tea is deep red, sour, and packed with anthocyanins. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah was 66 and she had a serious sweet tea habit. She lived in the South, and sugary tea was just part of life. Her blood sugar was creeping into the pre-diabetic range, and her pressure was high. She needed to break the sugar habit, but she hated plain water. I introduced her to cold-brewed hibiscus tea. We bought dried hibiscus flowers. They are very cheap and available at most health food stores or online. She would put a handful in a pitcher of water in the fridge overnight. The next day, she had a brilliant red, tart drink. To combat the sourness without spiking her sugar, she used a tiny bit of stevia, a natural sweetener that doesn't affect glucose. She started drinking 3 cups of this a day. Research suggests that 3 cups of hibiscus tea daily can lower systolic blood pressure by up to 7 points. That is comparable to a low dose of some medications. Sarah loved the ritual of it. It felt like a fancy cocktail because of the beautiful color. After 6 weeks, not only had her blood pressure dropped, but her fasting blood sugar had improved because she had eliminated the sugary sweet tea. She had swapped a pro-inflammatory drink for an anti-inflammatory one. Now, a very important caution here. Hibiscus is powerful. If you are already taking a diuretic medication, specifically like hydrochlorothiazide, talk to your doctor. Hibiscus also has a mild diuretic effect, and you don't want to overdo it. Also, rinse your mouth with water after drinking it, as the natural acids can be tough on tooth enamel if you sip it all day long. But for a natural, delicious way to lower numbers, the sour tea ritual is a champion. 13. The auditory shield. This is the final accelerator, and it is invisible. Noise. We live in a loud world. Traffic, leaf blowers, televisions, constant notifications. Your ears never sleep. Even when you are asleep, your brain is processing sound. If you live in a noisy environment, your body is constantly microdosing on stress hormones. Studies have shown a direct link between living near a major road or airport and higher hypertension rates. Let me tell you about Albert. Albert was 73. He lived in an apartment complex that was right next to a busy avenue. He said he was used to the noise of the trucks and sirens. He didn't even hear them anymore consciously, but his body heard them. His morning blood pressure was always high, suggesting his sleep quality was poor. We couldn't move his apartment, so we had to build a shield. We instituted the auditory shield protocol. First, during the day, he created quiet hours. For 1 hour in the afternoon, he turned off the TV, put the phone in another room, and just read in silence. This gave his nervous system a break from the constant input. Second, and most importantly, we treated his bedroom. He bought a white noise machine. It produces a steady, rushing sound like a fan or rain. This sound masks the sudden spikes of noise from the street. Instead of his brain being jerked awake by a siren, the white noise smoothed out the auditory environment. Albert reported that for the first time in years, he slept through the night without waking up. His morning blood pressure dropped because his cortisol levels had finally been allowed to bottom out during deep sleep. If you cannot buy a machine, a simple box fan running in the corner of the room works perfectly. You are creating a sound bubble that tells your primitive brain you are safe, you can relax. General conclusion: we have covered a tremendous amount of ground together. We started with the fundamentals, the silent gap to ensure we are measuring the truth, not the noise. The 4-7-8 breath to manually override the stress response. The potassium buffer to help our kidneys balance the salt. The vascular unloading walk to use our muscles as a glucose sink. The isometric grip to train our vessels to open while we sit. The fluid balance to prevent the sludge of dehydration. The evening blue block to respect our circadian rhythm. And then we went deeper into the hidden accelerators. The nitric oxide feast of beets and greens to chemically dilate arteries. The thermal peripheral shift to draw blood away from the core. The magnesium anchor of pumpkin seeds to relax the muscle fibers. The vertical digestion window to protect the vagus nerve. The sour tea ritual to replace sugar with medicine. And the auditory shield to protect our peace. This might feel like a lot, and I want to be very clear. You do not need to do all 13 of these things tomorrow. If you try to do everything at once, you will get stressed, and stress raises blood pressure. That is the opposite of what we want. My prescription for you is to pick one item from the first section and one item from the second section. Maybe you start with the breathing and the water. Do those for a week. See how you feel. See what the numbers do. Then, maybe you add the walking or the hibiscus tea. Think of your health like a garden. You don't plant every seed on the same day. You plant one, you water it, you watch it grow. Then, you plant another. Over time, these small actions weave together to create a safety net for your health. You are building a lifestyle where your blood pressure and blood sugar are managed not just by pills, but by how you breathe, how you eat, how you move, and how you sleep. That is true power. That is true independence. I'm Dr. Ben Harris. Thank you for trusting me with your time. If you know someone, a friend, a spouse, a sibling who is struggling with their numbers and feels like they are out of options, please share this guide with them. It might be the tool they have been looking for. And finally, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We are building a community for people over 60 who are choosing to take control of their health with clarity and calmness. I want you to be part of that.